Now, with Israel and Hamas reaching no consensus on a ceasefire, Egypt has now come up with its plan for Gaza. Cairo has outlined a three-stage deal for a truce and the release of all hostages held in Gaza. And most importantly, this proposal can bring Israel back to the negotiating table. Hamas's chief Ismail Haniyeh was in Cairo last week, where he discussed the prospects of ceasefire and hostage release with its officials. And Haniyeh reportedly met Egypt's spy chief and key mediators. And our officials involved in the talks have said that Egypt has laid out a three-phase plan for ending the war in Gaza. The first stage of Egypt's plan would be a 2-week halt in the fighting, which can be extended further if needed. And during this period, Israeli tanks will withdraw from Gaza and allow humanitarian aid to enter. Hamas will alongside release 40 hostages, especially women, minors and elderly men. Now, in return, Israel would release 120 Palestinian prisoners. Now, in the second phase, Egypt would mediate talks between Palestinian factions, mainly the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, and Cairo would help in forming a technocratic government in Gaza that would pave the way for Palestinian parliamentary and presidential elections. The third and the final stage would include a comprehensive ceasefire, the release of remaining Israeli soldiers in return for a number of remaining Palestinian prisoners, and in the final phase, Israel would withdraw its forces from cities in the Gaza Strip and allow displaced Gazans from the north to return to their homes. Now, amid these reports, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has maintained that Israel will keep fighting in Gaza until a complete victory over Hamas is achieved.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו מעמיקים את המלחמה ברצועת עזה. אנחנו נמשיך להילחם עד לניצחון המוחלט על החמאס. זאת הדרך היחידה להשיב את חטופינו, לחסל את החמאס ולהבטיח שעזה לא תהיה יותר איום על ישראל.
And we now have our correspondent Jody Cohen, who's joining us live from Jerusalem. Jody, now there are reports of new proposals being considered to work towards ending the fight. How realistic are they?
Hi, Aditi. Yes, we're hearing various reports in the media of a couple of proposals, firstly an Egyptian one and also an Israeli one. So as you said, the Egyptian proposal basically ultimately suggests ending the war, freeing the hostages, and also forming a joint Palestinian Authority Hamas government in Gaza. Now, according to some Israeli officials, they've indicated this hasn't been outright rejected, but there are clearly problems with this and would be considered problematic in Israel, keeping Hamas in power. That's because Israel considers that Hamas still poses a threat to Israel, and Hamas has publicly said that it would carry out and is planning more 7th of October style massacres against Israel again and again and again. Now, according to another report, there's a potential Israeli proposal also on the table that could ultimately, potentially, allow the Hamas chiefs in Gaza to leave to go to another country such as Qatar and not to target them in the war. And that would be in exchange for the release of the 129 hostages remaining in Gaza and also ultimately an end to the war. But that's considered also to be a long-term proposal, not relevant now. Excuse me, I didn't know if that was a rocket siren. Not relevant now, and that's because Israel is determined to dismantle Hamas's infrastructure so it doesn't pose a threat. Now, this just comes a few days after the UN Security Council resolution passed that did not in the end call for a ceasefire, and that's because the US would have used its veto again against that. They negotiated for days, and the actual voting on that resolution was delayed by a number of days as they negotiated the final text, which ultimately called for the freeing of the hostages and for more aid to be distributed into Gaza. Now, the US abstained on that vote. The US ambassador to the UN said that they were appalled that it didn't condemn Hamas explicitly. But we do know that the US would like to see a transition to low-intensity fighting by January. And Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has said that as the goals are achieved in a particular area, then they would be able to move on to the next phase in the fighting.
Thanks, Jody, for joining us and giving those updates, and stay safe.